Hey, Shabbat Shalom, everybody. Good to see you. Hope everybody's doing well out there and have had a good week. It's been, boy, here in the South, Oklahoma and Texas, it's been quite the quite the challenge in the last week. I'm so thankful that we've got some warmer, nice weather today. I mean, it's the
Above
first
freezing.
decent day that we've had in a long time. I mean, in terms of, and I'm thankful that we had some sunshine and some of those horrifically cold temps last week, but it just feel like I'm finally starting to thaw out today,
Yeah,
after all this.
it's kind of nice.
Got on my Rush Limbaugh tie today.
He's had a
It's
hard
been,
time of it.
I really have, it's been really kind of strange. And I've talked to Julie about it. I said I don't believe I mean, it's not even close. The impact that the death of Rush Limbaugh has had upon me, unlike and I never met him, but other people that I respected, presidents and people have died in the past, and I might have felt kind of bad about it, but not like this. A lot of you know that I do artwork and I've done artwork since I was a little kid. And, so I thought, well, why is this hitting me so hard? And I thought, well, I started looking at it, the amount of time that me and Rush Limbaugh have spent in a room together while I'm creating art for nearly 30 years. And so I've spent much more time with him than nearly any human being that I've ever been around. And so I learned so much from him and like many other people as well. And so I know he's going to be sorely missed, and was a great American hero that has had such a profound effect upon generations. And so,
Well, and just helping them to know how to frame the current events in just a different kind of framework and paradigm to see current events through, because if you just allow it to be framed for you by the media, even back then when our media was less reactionary to things, you still just kind of got the collective viewpoint of the culture, whatever the conventional wisdom was, or the conventional wisdom of each side of the culture. But Rush really just kind of gave you a different way, a different perspective to see current events and how to start asking questions and to practice critical thinking. And I mean, like you said, you listened to him for almost 30 years, and so you don't necessarily have to sit under a rabbi or a very great teacher of the scriptures to learn certain skills. We have to learn to find and place value wherever we find it, and to pick up the thing and learn the thing of value, even if it doesn't come to us the way we think it might.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, I mean, he's such a good example in so many ways. And a lot of times I've heard it said that your enemies help define you well, and Rush has and has had some good enemies, and so it speaks well of him too. The amount of hate and vitriol that has been aimed at him in life and in death, even, unfortunately.
It's a badge of honor.
Yeah, it is, and I'm sure he expected that to come. But yeah, he'll certainly be missed, and yeah, I hope that people who had a love for him like me will also take those lessons and that example, and continue that of upholding truth and the things that are right, and a love for freedom and for this country, and being willing to take the arrows, being willing to a very brave person, and it's hard for especially younger people. I don't think that most people of any age, but especially younger people, realize the profound effect he has had on this world. It shows you the power that one person can have in this whole world, because sometimes there's movements, there's teams of people, but for the most part, this man did this by himself. And there probably wouldn't be a Fox News if there hadn't been a Rush Limbaugh. There wouldn't be talk radio,
radio,
without Rush Limbaugh. AM radio probably it wouldn't still be around. It's not around in Europe for the most part. They don't put it in the cars or anymore. Nobody listens. And it was dying, and he saved it, and he even saved FM radio, and was very innovative in other technology. The internet changed the way a lot of those things were done.
Made it a cool thing again.
Yeah, well, I mean, he created he was a person who was good at reading the tea leaves and being on the cutting edge, and he didn't look to the conventional wisdom.
No.
He didn't look out or, do like a lot of politicians or other people and put their finger in the wind to see what the fads were looking like,
He was a nonconformist, and he acted
absolutely.
in his integrity, and he could stand alone if he thought he was right. And I mean, those are admirable, noble qualities. Absolutely.
Yeah. So, wonderful example. Today's Torah portion is called Teruma, and that's going to be in the book of Exodus, chapter 25, verse 1 through 27, verse 19. And Teruma, there's not really a great translation of that word in the English language. Often it's just translated as offering or something akin to that, or maybe it might be translated as like an elevation offering or to lift up kind of thing. Not like the olah that we'll talk about some other time, that is the burnt offering, or sometimes it might even be translated as elevation offering because it has this connotation of upness as well. But we're going to begin reading now about the tabernacle, and there's so many levels and ways we can look at this. But and I remember, I think, making the point this year. I can't always remember from year to year the things that I've said or that we've talked about, but like I think it is pretty important to pay attention to the amount of words and pages given to various subject matter. And I know I remember talking about in the book of Genesis how much time was given to the figure of Joseph the righteous, and the son of Jacob or Israel, and the amount of time given to him in the story. But if we were to say, well, in the book of Exodus, this is the thing that's given the most time, and I would even say in the whole Torah, I'm pretty confident that if we took all of the information, all of the subject matter, and we saw how much time was used, how many pages on particular subject matter, I'm going to say that the bulk of the Torah pertains directly or indirectly to the subject of the tabernacle or the Mishkan. Now, Mishkan comes from the root shakan, that means to dwell, and it's similar to the etymology of Shekinah, or what is often pronounced as Shekinah, the Shekinah glory, the dwelling presence of God. That is also a feminine attribute. That is, I know I've talked about it quite a bit in the past. That is a feminine word, just as ruach, spirit, is a feminine word. El Shaddai, also feminine. And so
in Hebrew,
yes, yeah, and we've discussed those kinds of things before. How that and it's a whole thing in itself, a whole extensive study by itself. But God's image and attributes are not exclusively masculine, but masculine and feminine, because in humanity, male and female, He created them in the image of God. Created him. And so the first part of, you have anything you want to add? Any of that?
No, because we could get off.
I know, we could.
On a rabbit
any
trail.
number of these things could be.
There's a
we
danger.
spend a lot of time on.
Yeah.
Well, how this is gonna begin in Teruma, it's with these offerings that are being given by the children of Israel. There's this call in chapter 25, verse 1 of Exodus. Hashem spoke to Moses, saying, "Speak to the children of Israel, and let them take for me," strange wording, "let them take for me." Normally you think of an offering as a giving offering rather than taking an offering. A portion, and that's the way it's translated in my version. In this particular translation, the word Teruma is translated as a portion. From every man whose heart motivates him, you shall take my portion. And then it goes on to say, this is the portion. So there's 3 times that the word Teruma appears in those 2 verses, and the sages extrapolate from that the 3 types of Teruma offerings. But I'd like to focus a little bit. Rashi, the Jewish commentator, talks about how that there are 13 categories of items that are laid out here in the beginning of Exodus. Now, in actuality, there's like 15 things, if I remember correctly, that are enumerated, but there is, he believes that there, and this is pretty widely accepted, that there's 13 categories of that. We were talking a little bit about the number 13 earlier today.
Well, I haven't done a lot of study on 13, but in our culture, just in American culture at least, probably Western civilization, there's this connotation of 13 being an unlucky number, like Friday the 13th or whatever, and most people don't know the historical relevance of that, and I probably couldn't get it right if I tried to retell it. But in Judaism, 13 represents, is it Shema? Like the,
Well,
Echad. Echad, the oneness of God, and the 13 attributes of God. And so now you're saying that it's considered, it's widely accepted that there are 13 categories of offering for the sanctuary, the tabernacle, where God would dwell among his people. So to me, those are pretty significant symbolisms of 13 that make it not a bad number.
Right, yeah. Any number and symbol, just about, that I can think of that we've talked about before, we're very geared in this culture to think about a particular symbol or number as good or bad or positive or negative, but really every number, every symbol has the light and shadow side. It can go either way. And so, we think of 7 as a positive number, and it is, but it also can be negative.
Well, and even like snake, not to get off in the symbol of the snake, you would think, well, that's all bad. But the brazen serpent, being a foreshadowing of Yeshua being raised up in execution, pouring out healing and salvation for everyone, there's a mystery in that. There's a mystery for me in that. But you do yourself a favor when you don't just automatically come in and render a hard verdict around a symbol, because the Bible's a book of symbols, and so if you really want to understand it, I've learned that you can't just rush in with a rash decision that this means this and this is bad. Well, let's look at all the scriptural references to something. Let's go a little bit deeper than the surface level, which is really, and I'm not trying to step on anybody's toes, I was raised Christian, but this was a book of the Hebrews and of the Hebrew language, and to really dig all of the nuggets of wisdom out of it, you really do need to go into that aspect of it, because otherwise there are certain things about it you're never going to understand, and some of these deeper things and deeper symbolism showing deeper truth that God intended, you're never going to find any other way.
Sure. Yeah, in terms of this contribution of 13 categories here, you might think about, if you really think about it, I mean, I can think of passages that the number 13 is, I think, the first time the phrase is used. It says in the 13th year they rebelled, I believe, early in Genesis, talking about these vassal kings, I believe, that rebelled or that were paying tribute to this other guy and rebelled against him. But of course, Revelation 13, we have the rebellious beast system and that sort of thing. But on the other hand, in 1 Corinthians 13, we have the love chapter, love having 13 attributes that are discussed there, and which, interestingly, ahava in Hebrew, love, has the gematria, or numerical value, of 13. And likewise, as Julie said, the numerical value of echad is 13. And so the word for echad, oneness, unity, has numerical value of 13. And so we kind of begin to see this, and Julie was talking about a little bit earlier about how the 12 tribes of Israel, or when we think about those things, that we know, normally the Bible uses that phrase, the 12 tribes of Israel, and it's always set up in a way to where there's 12 tribes, just like the breastplate. But in terms of the encampment, there's the 12 tribes of Israel, but in the middle of Israel, not counted with the other 12, is the 13th, Levi, that brings about the unity and oneness of the whole thing. And also you mentioned the 13 attributes of God that are discussed also that we'll get into later on. I'll read down through this list real quick of the things that are, because you can't just contribute anything you want to this. It's a noble, righteous cause to contribute to the building of a situation, a space-time where the Creator can and will interact with His people. It's a noble thing, but you can't just bring anything. Something that you purchased at a garage sale probably wouldn't be appropriate for this. And automatically we begin to see here all the way through all of the scriptures, it helps us to understand the concept of holiness and what is appropriate to various times and various places or spaces. And so what we're also going to be looking at, and I'm sure I will talk about it in the coming weeks, you will notice probably pretty often the juxtaposition between the subject matter of the Sabbath, probably starting next week or the week after. The scripture will mention the Sabbath. Of course, it already has, but you will begin to see how the scripture will sort of pause in discussing the tabernacle, the construction of it, to begin talking about some commandment about the Sabbath. And so what we're dealing with when we're looking at those things, and even in the, I believe it's in Leviticus, might be in Leviticus 19, I'm not sure about that at the moment, but there's a commandment, I believe it may be in the Torah portion, Kedoshim, actually, that it says, guard my Sabbaths and honor my sanctuary. And so that's a similar theme that we're dealing with. So why did it say that in one verse, guard my Sabbaths and honor my sanctuary? And why does it the Torah vacillate from discussing the construction of the Mishkan, the tabernacle, to discussions about the Sabbath? Because we're dealing with set apart or sacred space and sacred time. And so it's connecting those two themes and teaching us how to create sacred time and sacred space.
Mm-hmm. Well, and I mean, Einstein basically said the same thing, I mean, in a different way. He connected space and time into kind of a dual dimension, which I just find interesting, because then when you have that paradigm to look through and you go back to the scriptures, you start seeing the link there thematically. Like it literally doesn't say, and thou shalt observe a direct link between my spaces and it's not spelled out, but you start to see that the themes of it are connected, especially with that scripture you just read.
Even etymologically, in terms of words, we will see how, I'm sure a lot of you are familiar with the Shema and reciting it, and we conclude the Shema with, blessed are you, O Lord our God, King of the universe. And you probably know, or you might know, that it's Melech HaOlam, King of the universe. But you may also be aware that Olam is often translated as forever, or an age, or usually a long time. But the point is that word Olam can be translated as a space or time. It can be translated as world, universe, or forever. Same in the Greek even. The word aeonian or eon can be translated as both world and forever or everlasting. Those kind of space and time, both in Hebrew and Greek and perhaps in other languages. Let me quickly read down through the list here, and you can go in and look at it slower later on, but it's first going to begin talking about the types of metals that you can contribute. Gold, silver, and copper, and that's going to be Zahav, Kesef, and Nekashet. In turquoise, that's going to be techelet. That's going to be the same color of blue, that the same dye from a murex shell that is used to make the tzitzit, or the fringes upon the corners of the garments. Purple, armanon, scarlet wool, linen, goat's hair, red dyed ram skins, takash skins. The takash is understood to be an animal that's extinct, that went extinct apparently shortly after this time, that was multicolored animal of some kind. Acacia wood, some of your translations will say shittim wood, and you might even wonder, okay, well, where are they getting this wood out in the wilderness, the midbar? Well, tradition says that Jacob, planted shittim trees or acacia trees in Egypt, that he brought them down and planted them in Egypt, knowing that the redemption would come at some point, and had given instructions for his descendants to take this wood when they left. Which brings up another point too. Well, let me get through this list here, and then we'll pick it up. So we've got the metals, and we've got the fabrics, and the skins for the covering, and then the wood. Oil for illumination, that's going to be olive oil. Spices for the anointment oil and the aromatic incense. Shoham stones and stones for the settings, for the ephod and the breastplate. And so we've got precious metals, precious fabrics, precious skins, and precious stones of different types. And then, somebody might think, where did they get all this stuff? Well, they got all this stuff from Egypt.
Loot.
Yeah, this was spoil that they took with them as part of their reward and part of the redemption that they experienced in Egypt. And this was foretold even way back in Genesis to Abraham, that his descendants would spoil the nation that had oppressed them. And stated another way, because this is always relevant to us. It's always relevant on multiple levels. I've talked a while back about how the whole Egyptian experience and wilderness experience and all of this whole narrative is prophetic, and it points to that which has been, will be again, and there's no new thing under the sun. And so it points to something else on a global scale, like the being brought out of the land of Egypt, but like that redemption. But looking at it more on an individual level, because what are you going to get out of this? What can you read this about? How does this affect your life?
Yeah.
For one thing, we see that this particular offering wasn't obligatory, that it was a voluntary offering, and you weren't compelled to. If you don't feel like giving, you don't want to, you weren't to do it grudgingly, like the New Testament says. These were cheerful givers. And but I think it kind of interesting the way that this is mentioned. Speak to the children of Israel and let them take from me a portion. From every man whose heart motivates him shall you take my portion. Let me state it in a slightly different way. Speak to the children of Israel and say unto them and let them take for me a portion from every man's heart. Let's take a portion, an offering from every man's heart that motivates him. But see how that changed the whole picture there when we're talking about taking a portion from every person's heart. We begin to see what God truly values, and after we get to these particular valuables, we're going to then begin to see the construction of the tabernacle and everything. But we don't start with the outside and work our way in, which we normally do. I mean, we don't, in a house, we don't have the furniture built or made and purchase it before we get the walls and the roof on. But
Yeah.
it's not the way God does things, because God starts out with the most important thing in the innermost holy place, the Ark of the Covenant, and then begins to sort of move out from there as a general rule. But the point is that I was trying to make with that, they had something to contribute, and they didn't have to show up empty-handed. Everyone whose heart motivated him, they would accept from them these particular things, these 13 attributes. And so where did they get them? From Egypt. What's another way to say it? They brought these valuables from their former life, their past. In their past, in their former life, there are valuables that they were able to take with them on this road. Not only are these valuables important enough to bring with them, these are the very things that are used to build God a dwelling place.
That's pretty amazing when you think about it, because these things weren't originally created for that. They weren't originally set aside or consecrated for that. But they spoiled Egypt on the way out as a part of a judgment, and for being slaves, and they stripped them of their valuables, and God used what they had with them from, like you said, from their life, because
from the time that they were serving Pharaoh and building
his cities,
storage cities,
yeah,
and buildings for Pharaoh and for the Egyptians. From that, they gained these
raw materials that were melted down and reformed and refashioned into a consecrated holy place where Yahweh met them and interacted with them. And there's some mystery in some of this, because in other portions of Scripture, it gets into the holy things and what is made holy by certain things, what is contaminated by certain things, and things you might think would be okay aren't, and sometimes things like this that you might think wouldn't be okay is. And so you just kind of have to look at all the different scriptures that deal with the holy and the contaminated to try to see maybe what those patterns are, because God's ways aren't our ways, and the scriptures just don't always make sense. They just don't always, and anybody that acts like they just always make sense, either they're much more advanced than I am, which is possible, very possible, or we're just not asking enough questions and being honest enough about the things that don't make sense to us. We don't want to know badly enough. I'll read something in the scriptures and I'll ask the Lord, I don't understand this, or this is a curiosity to me. Why would you major in this minutia to give us these dimensions for this in triplicate into infinity, and then something else that I consider to be fairly important, maybe a sentence goes to, in the scriptures. Maybe there's other commentary where it goes into more detail, but those things aren't always clear to me. But they're there for a purpose. If they're there for a purpose.
Right, and that sort of leads to a point that there's this young man that I remember running into a couple of years ago that I had seen him when he was younger. Maybe I think he was like a senior in high school or something, and I ran into him at a gas station fueling up, and was talking to him and asking him how he was being and everything, and he just started talking, and you know people like this that they're just totally in their own head about what they want to do and what they want to say, and that's all they're focused upon. They're not focused upon anyone else or what anyone else has to say, or how your day or your life has been.
We've all done it.
Yeah, but it's when we see that kind of thing, it should be a little bit of a wake-up call to try to practice mindfulness and consciousness and focus, and to try to be better listeners, and just anyway, my point is, I remember something that he said. He was talking about all the reading and studying that he had done over the years, and he said basically, I feel like I've got everything pretty much figured out now. And he said, I know how, it might sound, but I think, and I'm like, okay, but there, it's impossible on so many levels, because just like the scripture here, yeah, we can begin to read this, and there's things that we can figure out to whatever level or whatever degree, maybe about how these things were constructed, or the history, or the meaning of the Hebrew and these kinds of things. But even so, there's another level and another level and another level, and there's the nature of truth. It's real truth, genuine truth isn't dead. It's living and breathing, and it is
fathomless.
Yeah, you can't ever plumb the depths of it. You can't ever come to the end and say, okay, now I understand it all, or I understand all of this Torah portion, Teruma now. Now I get this Torah portion. And there is this, I've seen this among a lot of people in religion particularly. They feel like, okay, I've learned a little bit about that there's a Sabbath, and that it's Saturday. I mean, not a great way to say it, but that's a better understanding than many of us once had.
Sure.
But and then they learn a few things, a few Hebrew blessings and songs, and they feel like that they've arrived. Okay, now we're here. This thing, I mean, the tabernacle shows us this. There's poles on the Ark of the Covenant. There's poles on a lot of these objects, and these things were designed by God to transport relatively easily, because none of these things were going to stay in one. They didn't pour a slab of cement out here in the wilderness right after they left and began construction for that thing to stay there. God knew that He wasn't going to leave them in that spot, and that all of these things were designed to be mobile and flexible for flexible travel.
Well, for the journey. And I mean, that's not to say that there's not a fixed reality that is objective in the realm that God lives in, which is kind of funny to say, but because He's God, and how could anybody fathom that? But in His space, in His dimension, there are fixed, immutable truths and foundations that we just know they're there. We can't speak with any...
We're discovering them all the time.
With any detail or whatever. But in this time or in dimension, because we're pilgrims passing through, and this is temporal, and this isn't our home, and yet we're here, and we've got to travel the journey toward truth and towards work out our own salvation with fear and trembling, and much fear and much trembling and much bewilderment a lot of the time. These things that are of a spiritual fixed nature that emanate from God have to be given a mobility to us. It's not that they are mercurial and they change in and of themselves or in and of their nature. Their form has to be fluid enough in this realm for us to carry them from encampment to encampment. And so a while ago you said, people learn some things and they think, well, now I'm here. Well, now you are here, and here is not there, and God willing and you willing, here is seeing better than the last step. But it's never a true destination. I mean, if you ever think that now, like you said, now I've arrived, okay, arrival's not a problem. Thinking that you're never going to move forward from that spot can be a problem while
Especially
we're here.
If you believe that, then you tend to stop growing.
Absolutely, because now you've arrived at a predetermined spot. And I mean, the promised land, yes, I know that we've got the type and symbol of the promised land where they did, rest, and God selected a place to put His name in His temple, and the foundation stone was laid there. I still think that is a symbol of a spiritual reality that is fixed inside of us. But in terms of our own understanding of that fixed reality, we do have to move from glory to glory knowing that we don't know what we don't know.
Right.
And I mean, and being okay with admitting that we don't. And sometimes my biggest growth spurts came later in my life when I finally admitted I just don't know certain things as well as I would like. And then once the big chunk of my belief system, whatever the belief was, I don't even necessarily mean it's all religious belief, just all kinds of belief about myself, who I was, what my purpose is, what I'm supposed to do, what the work in the world is. When that started kind of dismantling a little bit, and I thought, I've built these concepts in my mind, and we're supposed to work with framework and scaffolding to get from point A to B, and he understands that. But if it ever solidifies into something that's cemented where it's not supposed to be cemented, that's where idolatry comes into play. Because you start to put more, more confidence and more importance around the thing you've built and the idea of it and your own identity and relationship to it than you do in keeping things free and fluid, trying to follow the pillar of fire and cloud when it says after 20 or 25 years of building something that you have a lot of stake and confidence in, get up from this place and go somewhere else, and you have to give up that part of your identity to say, see ya, because the living God is going there. And as much as I like what I've built, and as secure as it makes me feel, and as much as I feel like I know who I am in relationship to this thing I've built, if I don't follow the living God, then I'm choosing this thing that I've built more than I'm walking with the consuming fire that made me. And that's the idolatry. That's the very great danger, because you may feel more secure and be in a much more dangerous position because Ichabod, the glory of the Lord, has departed, and you either didn't know or you didn't care enough to follow it. It's a scary thing to me.
Very good, and that's something that we'll be getting to in one of the upcoming Torah portions with the golden calf, because it's interesting that a lot of the narrative of the construction of the Mishkan or tabernacle is interrupted by the building of the golden calf. And so you kind of see the light and shadow side of forms and of structure and a framework like you're talking about, which would be a good time maybe to, after giving us the list of these different materials, these 13 categories here according to Rashi, in verse 8 of chapter 1, it says, it says, okay, take my portion, the teruma, from everyone whose heart motivates him, shall you take my portion. And then it gives us all of the different materials, and then picks it back up, verse 8. They shall make a sanctuary for me, a mikdash, so that I may dwell among them. So that people don't get the idea, they shall make a sanctuary for me so I can dwell in it. It's not what he said. They shall make a sanctuary for me that I may dwell among them. And now there's some places in Exodus, also in Leviticus. Sometimes Paul, the Apostle Paul, when he's quoting things, he sort of gives you these whole bunch of sound bites from different scriptures thrown together. And there's one, for example, if I can remember where it's at. I think I've got it somewhere among my notes. Yeah. In 2 Corinthians chapter 6, verse 16, it says, "In what agreement has the temple of Elohim with idols?" Again, interesting the juxtaposition of the concept of a structure, a godly structure, and a bad image, a bad form. Good form, bad form. But here in 2 Corinthians 6:16, it says there's no agreement, there's no synthesis in reality, no communion, has the temple of Elohim with idols. For you are the temple of the living Elohim. You are the temple of God. You are that form, that structure for God to express his essence through. As Elohim has said, I will dwell in them. and walk in them, and I will be their Elohim, and they shall be my people. And it says, and Elohim has said, there's not a verse that says all of that. There's several verses that say those parts, and he weaves it together. Just like the artisans, and we'll talk about it coming up in the future. We'll discuss Bezalel and Aholiab, two of the lead artists that construct this dwelling place, this sanctuary, so that God can dwell among His people, and as Second Corinthians there talks about, ultimately, so He can dwell in them is really the aim, in and among and walk with them. And it's so amazing, when we get to really look at the Hebrew about a lot of the things that are discussed about the tabernacle and about the Ark of the Covenant, the menorah, these different things. It uses a lot of terminology that is very biological. It refers to his head, his feet, his shoulders, side, rib. All of these things, are used in discussing the tabernacle and the different furniture within the tabernacle. And by the way, as near as I can tell, when we're talking about the furniture, there are 6 pieces of furniture plus 1. Because I think most people would tend to count the whole thing as 6. We have, starting out, as we're entering into the Mishkan through the courtyard, we're facing west with our back to the east, back to the rising sun, facing west, or toward the future. The west represents the future more, whereas the east tends to represent the past. And it can be, that can be good or bad, because we're told to remember the ancient ways, and I believe the word there might even be, in that case, the same as the word for east. The word for east and ancient sometimes is the same word, kadim. And just like the word west, one of the words for west can be the same as the word for sea, S-E-A, because of the sea to the west there. So it says that in Exodus 25:9, according to all that I show you, after the pattern of the tabernacle and the pattern of all the instruments thereof, even so shall you make it. And the word for pattern there is the Hebrew word tavnit, that can be, and is translated in the King James. It means like a model or a blueprint, a resemblance. A structure is one of the definitions by Strong's. And in the King James Version, that word, the Hebrew word tavnit, is translated as the word figure, form, likeness, pattern, and similitude. So sometimes that helps to make the tabernacle according to the form, according to the pattern, according to the blueprint, according to the figure that I show you. And it says, all that I show you, according to all that I show you, the tabernacle itself. And when we're referring to the Mishkan or the tabernacle, the scripture, sort of like the word menorah, the menorah, usually when people say menorah, they picture a lamp that has 7 lampstands, seven branches to it. Likewise, when somebody says something about the tabernacle, people picture more of a bird's eye perspective of the outer court, like the outside curtains and everything. But in many ways, the tabernacle is the house within that yard. But sometimes, we refer to the whole thing as the Mishkan or tabernacle, but really the sanctuary, the Mishkan, is the little house that has walls and the roof and everything. Likewise, the menorah is called the menorah, and then 6 branches coming out of the menorah itself. Of course, the menorah is another word for a lamp or light. And so I just thought I would mention that to you. But the emphasis here and elsewhere with doing things according to God's pattern. And these are visual aids, and I don't think it's just that. I don't think this stuff is just symbolic.
No.
Because when we begin to understand things, I refer to Nikola Tesla fairly often, that he said if you want to understand the universe, think in terms of energy, frequency, and vibration. Well, all of those metals and fabrics and things have that, and have different kinds, unique ones. And when you put these things together in a certain way, you create an energy field.
Well, and a lot of times you don't link, when you talk about energy, frequency, and vibration, you think, oh, airy-fairy, new age weirdness or whatever, woo-woo that can't be proven. But that was coming from one of the greatest inventors. I mean, I don't know much about inventors throughout history, but we're still unpacking his writings, whoever has them, in 100 years later, or whatever exact time frame we're living in now from his birth, his life. We're still unpacking that as innovative inventors, and so he believed that, and then he made literal concrete inventions that incorporated those ideas, and they work, and we see now we have the technology now to actually really work some of the logistics out of how to do this. And so Nikola Tesla's not smarter than God, and so when God's telling them how to build the stuff to conduct electricity or to conduct whatever all the energy is or the fields, or when the presence of God comes down on the mercy seat on the lid, it's not just a conceptual thing. It is a literal presence that comes in, that he's not saying, don't come in there and say hi to me because I'm God and I'm going to be worshipped, and if you diss me, I'll knock you down and kill you. It's not that. We were talking about the power grid and the electrical grid this week, how the electrical grid does not care what your religion is, what your race is, what your belief is, whether you love God, whether you don't love God. There are laws that govern electricity. You either obey them and live, or you don't obey them and you die. And some of this, in my opinion, is a lot like that, because even when he came down on Sinai, he gave them specific instructions. You need to take 3 days to get ready for this, and do this, and don't do this, or whatever, and then don't let people touch the mountain, don't let animals come near it, fence it off. I mean, there were specific things that he said. And there's a reference, I don't remember what book it is in the New Testament, where it talks about Moses even quaked with fear. Hebrews. To go into this this horrific looking presence that came down on the mountain and burned a lot of it with fire. Mm-hmm. It was a scary looking thing. It wasn't just, what's that artist that paints the really pretty babies? Bodic. I don't know. He's
talking about Boogaroo?
Yeah, who's always painting these really pretty babies that kind of have little wings, and for some reason they have this little golden ribbon, and it's not like that. He is an awesome, holy God, and he is telling them, here's what you must do for me, being who I am, to be able to come into your dimension so that I can deal with you with who you are and where you are. You've got to be a holy people to me, but you don't even understand how much I'm dumbing this down for you. And it's pushing you to the edge of your holy limits, like it's cramping their style or whatever. But in order for that God, that being, to come and dwell among them and not consume them constantly for every little infraction, here's the guidelines of how you must live and conduct yourselves. It's not judgment. It's actually compassion and mercy. He's wanting fellowship, but he knows how he is. He knows who he is. He knows what will happen when even the limited amount of himself that he's bringing into our realm, because he's not bringing his fullness into our realm. It's like electrical current again. It's being, I don't know what the word is, scaled down, mm-hmm. so that when we turn the light on in our house, we don't have an explosion or whatever. And he's doing this with the very presence of himself that's manifesting in this physical space and time. So when he gives the people these specific guidelines of how to behave and how to construct this and who comes behind the curtain, how many times a year, all of these things, it's not just to give them a bunch of do's and don'ts. It's because he wants intimacy and connection with them, with who and how he is. He's trying to work with them, and he wants them to work with him so that they can have intimate connection.
Very good. Gosh, let's look at this right quick. There's a number of places, I mean, this is such a vast subject matter, and we haven't even, the Ark of the Covenant, the menorah, the outer altar, the altar of burnt offering or elevation offering, the altar of incense, the table of showbread. Oh, I didn't finish my thought earlier. We start out, we're facing west. The first thing that we see is the brazen, what's called often the brazen altar, or copper altar actually, or the altar of the Mizbeach, the altar of burnt offering or sacrifice is the first thing you see, and it was to be made 5 cubits by 5 cubits, a square, and 3 cubits high. And you walk further, and we see the copper laver. It's not mentioned yet in this Torah portion. It'll be mentioned soon. And we'll talk hopefully about what it was made out of and who contributed materials for that and everything.
Water. It was where they bathed.
Yeah,
Ritual
they
bathing.
had the priest had to wash their hands and their feet there. See, this begins to show us a blueprint of approaching God and how you've got to do that. We move on. We walk inside of the structure now, or if you're a priest, you walk inside of the structure, and there's the menorah to your left or to the south, and then to the right is the table of showbread, and then up close, right outside of the veil, is we're standing outside of the Holy of Holies now, or the Kiddush Kiddushim, is the altar of incense, and then inside of the Holy of Holies is in the smallest, most intimate space there, space-time, is the Ark of the Covenant. So that's 6 things. But there's something that I hadn't mentioned yet that the Scripture deals with as a separate thing that completes it all, and that is the Lid of Atonement. We think of the Ark of the Covenant sort of like these other things that I mentioned, the menorah or the tabernacle, but really you have the Ark, and then you have the Lid of Atonement that Christians often refer to as the mercy seat, the Kepharet in Hebrew, which is, better maybe way to say it is the Lid of Atonement or Lid of Covering. And that's what a true covering is an atonement, and vice versa. And so upon this lid that was made and fashioned out of pure gold, the cherubim were brought out of it, out of the same piece of gold. And then the Lid of Atonement, or the Kepharet, the mercy seat, was set atop the Ark of the Covenant. And then, later on, and reference is made to it here, to the 10 Commandments are going to be put in here, along with Aaron's rod that blossomed and budded and produced fruit, along with an omer, a bowl of manna, the bread from heaven. Those 3 witnesses are going to be inside of there. And so there are so many concepts that we really don't have time to get into, but when we look at the ark, which is the first thing that is mentioned here, in the heart of the whole thing is discussed first, and then it kind of begins to come out from there. But in verse 10, when it talks about the ark, it's going to be 2.5 cubits by 1.5 by 1.5 cubits. Now, I gave you the dimensions for the altar that you would see, which is 5 cubits by 5 cubits by 3 cubits. The Ark of the Covenant is 1.5 cubits by 1.5 cubits by 2.5 cubits. So 1.5 is half of 3, and 2.5 is half of 5, which are the dimensions of the altar, the Mizbeach, in the outer courtyard. Although its shape is square, and the shape of the Ark of the Covenant is rectangular. And then you have the Lid of Atonement with the two cherubim facing each other and looking down toward the ark there. Tradition says that, and their wings up, it says. It doesn't give us a lot of information about how this was to be constructed, what the cherubim were to look like that much, and it doesn't tell us the breadth of the ark or the thickness of a lot of these things. There's a lot of information that is left out that was transmitted unto Moses and unto the artists that we'll talk about in the future. But just to touch on a little bit, if you begin to see the subject matter objectively here, the arts community were absolutely central in creating a space-time for the Creator. And I believe it's always been that way. Whether we're talking about musicians, and we see the important role of music and the arts and all of these things in bringing about the presence of God and connecting God and the people together, which is the whole point of why this is being made in the first place, so that God may dwell among or in His people, this space-time, this set-apart space-time for Him. And it's a whole teaching in itself, and I've done presentations on this in the past. The ministry of Moses and Elijah, the two witnesses. This is a concept that we see here and that we see throughout the entire Bible, that says that every word has to be established out of the mouth of 2 or 3 witnesses. Also, no one could be put to death or condemned without the testimony of 2 or 3 eyewitnesses. Yeshua said, wherever 2 or 3 are gathered in my name, and we're talking about the living word here, wherever 2 or 3 are gathered in the name of the living word or the Son of God, He's there also. On the Mount of Transfiguration, we see that with Yeshua and Moses and Elijah appear there. They're the two cherubim, the 2 witnesses. Yeshua is the Ark of the Covenant that we're seeing there on the Mount of Transfiguration, with Moses and Elijah as the 2 witnesses. Because, and again, that's just a quick thumbnail sketch, because it's pretty involved, and basically the ministry of the 2 witnesses can be shown through the entire Bible from Genesis to Revelation. And it says that, regarding the Ark of the Covenant, verse 22 of chapter 25, here's the way this reads here in my translation. It is there that I will set my meetings with you. Talking about between the 2 cherubims above the mercy seat. Let's see. Let me read verse 21 and 22. You shall place the cover, the kepharet of the ark, the aron, from above, and unto the ark shall you place the testimonial tablets, the 10 commandments, that I shall give you. It is there that I will set my meetings with you, and I shall speak with you from atop the cover, from between the 2 cherubim that are on the ark of the testimonial tablets, and everything that I shall command you to the children of Israel. So, stated again, and you might look at the book of Numbers or Bamidbar, chapter 7, verse 89, Leviticus 16. This is the precise place that God will speak from between the 2 cherubims above the mercy seat. And so the Mount of Transfiguration, we're seeing Yeshua is the true ark. And the 2 witnesses, Moses and Elijah, are the 2 cherubims. And God will speak in that perfect place of unity there. And that's exactly what He did in the cloud. And we'll get into this maybe as we talk about Yom Kippur in Leviticus 16, and we get into the Torah portion Akharei Mot, maybe, that God will appear in the cloud and He will speak from between the 2 cherubims above the mercy seat. And so it's an important concept, I believe, to get down and realize and begin to connect the dots and see how this is a universal principle that goes beyond any one thing.
Mm-hmm. I agree. Well, and especially when you think about us being the temple, and day star rising in our hearts, if he's the center presence, the ark and the center presence also, his atonement is on our lid, and you start putting the human soul and body into that model, then the testimony of Yeshua, him being in us by the Spirit, and then you think of the two witnesses that need to be present, that are always present testifying of him. I think about Revelation where it says the dragon went after the remnants of her seed, they that had the testimony of Yeshua and kept the commandments of God. And this may be kind of controversial to people, but I believe that there are different ways to keep the commandments. I think that you can keep a physical letter of something and miss the essence of it entirely, and so really you don't really keep it if you miss the essence of it that's meant to transform and save you. And so anybody that I come in contact with that may not even be a Christian or Messianic or believer in any way, if I see the fruits of the Spirit and a love of truth or justice and compassion in these people, in my estimation, they're keeping the essence of something, maybe without understanding the legalities of it or the commandment of it, just like was it Paul talked about in the New Testament, where the Gentiles not having the law kept, and he didn't say the essence of the law, but the spirit of the law, that they kept that, and he was sent to the Gentiles, and he did tell them a few things up front, 3 or 4 things to do when converting to the way through Yeshua. He would give them 2 or 3 things, 3 or 4 to do, and then he said, because Moses is preached in the synagogues every Sabbath, and so while there is a necessity of coming up under the headship of whatever these witnesses are on each side of Yeshua and the testimony of Yeshua for our life, there's also their presence absolutely is vital and is necessary. But then again, back to framework, I've gotten a lot less dogmatic about the framework of their belief system, what I feel like it has to be. If they are obeying the spirit of something and they've got spiritual fruit, they may not have a correct theology, but if they are somehow following the leading of the Spirit that leads and guides into all truth, how can I prevent them from coming more?
Yeshua said, judge a tree by its fruit, not its theology.
Right? Yep.
And I know that sound doctrine and all that is important,
yes, it is.
But it is not the utmost important. There is, the fruits and having the Spirit of God and the attributes of Messiah Yeshua, which all of this is trying to get us toward having the mind of Messiah Yeshua. And otherwise, as Paul says, though I understand all mysteries and I can do all, miracles and do all kinds of things, and I don't have love, which is the fruits, that encompasses really the idea of all the fruits, I don't have anything. Let me close with this. This is found in the book of 2 Kings, chapter 4, verse 10. This is talking about Elisha. There was this somewhat wealthy lady, apparently, that he would come by and stay with this family on occasion. And the lady gets to thinking about it, and she talks to her husband, and she said, let's make a room for this prophet that comes by, where he maybe come by and stay more, was the idea, I'm sure.
His own space.
Yeah, his space time, and of course he had the double portion of Elijah that we've been talking about. Elijah, this Elisha, the student of Elijah, who received the double portion of him. She says, let us make a little chamber or a room, I pray thee, on the wall, and let us set up for him there a bed, a table, a stool, and a candlestick. And it shall be when he comes to us that he shall turn in here. And it's interesting because the word for bed is mitah, it starts with the Hebrew letter Mem. Table is Shilkan, and it begins with the Sheen. Kisei is chair, and it begins with the Kaf. And the lamp or candlestick, as it's used here in the KJV, is the Hebrew word ner. And you put those words together, the bed, the table, the chair, and the lamp, and you end up with the word Mishkan. And so basically this woman was creating they created a Mishkan in their home for the prophet of God, and the spirit, the testimony of Yeshua is the spirit of prophecy. And so I believe that when we begin to look at this, we all are, whoever's heart motivates them at least, should think about creating a space-time, creating a Mishkan in their life, a tabernacle in their life, both within and I think even physically. It is a good idea to have to create some structures and customs and rooms and things that are for holy purposes. You're not going to really learn the meaning of holiness if you don't learn to set things apart and have things that are just used for holy occasions or holy times and things like that, And people don't understand that in our culture, that of what is appropriate for different times or different. There's times where it's not appropriate to be talking about the ball game or telling jokes or talking about the Tiger King. There's times when, and probably not many opportunities for that.
No.
But if it's, and there's times to get up and get yourself a cup of coffee, and there's times not to. And this is a learning process. But when you're having prayer time, when you're having praise and worship time, or times that we're supposed to be at least focused upon bringing down the presence of God among the people, that isn't the time to act casually or do things. There's plenty of time during the week or even on the Sabbath sometimes to do certain things. But in those crucial times, it's imperative that the people of God develop an awareness of holiness and what is appropriate speech and appropriate action for particular times and spaces. And that's one of the things that Torah is trying to get us to understand.
Right. Absolutely. The appropriateness of the purpose that between the sacred and the profane, or in a lot of times in our case, just in my way of thinking, the sacred and the not sacred. I mean, because there's
common.
Yeah, I mean, we need, and common is not necessarily profane compared to the sacred it is, but you've got things that are profane that we don't need to even be associating with, and Torah is great to try to explain what all that is and show what all that is. But then you have the everyday stuff of living your lives, is the dishes that we use every day and that kind of maybe grow penicillin cultures in the sink sometimes when I don't focus on them. Is that normal? It is normal. Is it a reality in everyone's life at some point? Yes, unless you're a really diligent person beyond most of the people, beyond myself. But then, is that appropriate then to use that same dish that we let develop badness in, like use for the Passover Seder? And I'm not trying to be real religious about it's about the dish or not about it. It's about your understanding of set apartness. And so, yes, it's a spiritual thing, but it's also a spiritual reality. And if we give ourselves over to that truth of that, and we seek to honor God on the days that He says and in the way that He says, then we'll understand that there needs to be a difference in how we live and what we utilize regularly. That's not a problem. And trying to prepare for His presence coming down. And I think I often have said that we have this tradition in Passover of going to the door and looking for Elijah, and it's a special part of the Seder. But it started dawning on me some years ago. We really don't think he's coming. Like, we really don't prepare. We might set the table setting there, which is custom, and a cup. But I mean, I've even done this before where we've had people coming for Passover, a certain number of people, and our dining table is a certain number of chairs. And I've even set a TV tray in front of a chair and put Elijah's setup on a TV tray. And while that seems a little funny, and it also seems maybe practical because you know these people are coming, you don't know that he is, it started dawning on me, what if he showed up? I mean, we realize this is symbolic, but he left kind of weird. Who's to say he can't show up kind of weird? And I don't know why he would be coming to my house instead of someone else's house. That's not really the point. The point is preparedness.
In an attitude, in a mental
Yes.
attitude about things, and
absolutely,
and becoming
Preparing.
aware that we, not to beat ourselves up,
no.
but to become aware that we need to up our game in a lot of ways.
Well, if we want to experience the presence of God in a different way, a more full way, He is loving, has loving kindness, and He is long-suffering. He's also holy. And we have to be willing to change our levels of holiness and commonness. We have to be willing to change ourselves if we want to experience the living God who's a consuming fire. And I'm not even sure what all ways that would entail, but I can promise you it doesn't entail casualness.
Mm-hmm. That's right. That's probably a good place to stop. Thank you all very much for joining us today. Hope you're thawing out, and hope you've enjoyed the study. And maybe next time we can get back together, hopefully, and see you next week. Shabbat Shalom. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.